On today's episode, we're joined by John and Rick Padilla, a father-son duo who've turned unimaginable loss into lasting impact. After losing John's brother Jack to suicide, they've dedicated their lives to honoring him through advocacy, legal efforts, and powerful storytelling with John's Mountain in My Mind movement. John's also part of our Bark family, so this conversation is especially close to home as we talk about hope, healing, and the work still ahead. John, Rick, it's so good to have you here.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
Good morning. Thank you.
You made the trek, like, across the country.
Yep.
Yes.
4 a.m. yesterday to 7 p.m. yesterday night.
Wow. So really appreciate you doing that. We'll start with you, John. You're the founder of Mountain in My Mind. And can you just tell us more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So Mountain in My Mind is basically a documentary film series about mental health. The reason being, our mountain towns see a suicide rate that's nearly triple the national average. And the vast majority of that occurs in our youth. Recently, actually, where I live is Bozeman, Montana. Gallatin County was unfortunately ranked #1 for youth suicide rate in the country. And so I just felt this call to do something. And as a lifelong skier and athlete, one of the ways that I was able to do that was connect with some Olympians and professional athletes and say, hey, I know you guys have a story. And turns out every single one of them did, whether it was head injuries, depression, anxiety, a litany of different disorders. They were all willing to come together on camera and talk about it. So we've made 3 films so far, and the 4th one has been in the works for about a year. We've got another year left of filming, and it'll go on world tour again next fall.
Wow. Do you have any data or anecdotal tidbits of why it's the highest rate?
Yeah, I think that there's been a lot of research around that, and I think that there's about 7 different factors, but a few of them are more prevalent than others. One of those is stigma, it's something that we see a lot in mountain towns, that you get this, and in the West, pull yourself up by the bootstraps mentality. I'm sure most people have heard that phrase before.
Yeah, especially in the Southeast here too.
Yeah, it's the same kind of mentality there, and when you are experiencing an issue, there's not a lot of understanding in the community to go have a conversation about an issue like that. Another one of the big issues or barriers that we see in the Rocky Mountain West is the lack of available care. So it's a lot of times folks live hours from a therapist. And so it can be a little bit difficult to find a therapist if there's even any in your area at all. I think those 2 are really some of the bigger contributing factors. There's lots of other things. I'll let people do their own research about altitude and sunlight and seasonal affective disorder.
Right.
And our winters are long and gray.
Oh, that breaks my heart. But thankfully, you and I are both, a part of Bark that's helping to alert families ahead of time when their children are struggling. Speaking of that, John and Rick, I'm sure it never gets easy to tell your story, but for our audience, can you tell us about Jack?
Sure, I'm happy to start. And Jack was 15 years old. We lost him on February 14th of 2019. He was a freshman in high school. Jack was a very outgoing, personable, handsome young man. He was one that you would never expect, but I think sometimes what we've learned in these types of situations is some of these kids can mask it very, very well. And Jack was athletic, well received at school, smart, and just a joy to be around. I was looking at a photo the other day. We were in Mexico, and Jack somehow, with the family, he met up some biker, and this biker takes off this leather jacket, puts Jack on the Harley Davidson, and Jack has a smile from ear to ear. And that's who Jack was. He was just engaging, fun, and just a joy to be with.
You both were part of Childhood 2.0, where you and your wife, who's off camera, share more about what happened and what went into that terrible day and what happened after. For those people who haven't seen Childhood 2.0, I highly recommend it. It's free documentary on YouTube. It's about an hour and a half in length, and it goes into what is really happening with kids today. And you hear from children and teenagers themselves, in addition to thought leaders, experts, doctors. What has changed since Childhood 2.0 that came out in 2020?
Geez, speaking for myself, and I think in the state of Colorado, that had a tremendous impact. You and I are involved in a presentation a few years ago where we've highlighted that in a sizzle film that a filmmaker had put together. We just had a news story that came out in the Denver Post just last Sunday. Youth suicide rate is down in Colorado since 2020, and I want to attribute that to the type of work I think all of us are doing. 2.0, the great work John is doing, and other things that we're doing out in the community. So we're really thrilled with that. It was a front page article. So I think, all of our efforts collectively do make an impact, and we're seeing that.
Are there any resources that come to mind for families who have lost a loved one to suicide?
Yeah, I can definitely speak to that. Something that I did right after we lost Jack was join and attended a group therapy session and for several weeks called Judy's House. That's just in the Denver area. So for anybody who's listening that's in the Denver area, I highly recommend, if you've lost someone to suicide, reaching out to Judy's House. They get a group of people together with a licensed clinical mental health worker, and you do a variety of activities working through trauma. And it was just, I still talk to the people that I was in the program with, and we're still friends. And it was pretty impactful for me to have that sort of resources and support. But and I think my dad's done a good job at this. This is separate. He is really good. It's the Suicide Loss Club or Suicide Survivor Club it's the worst club to be a part of. It's horrible. But the thing about our little club is we really look out for each other, and we always kind of try and be there for the next unfortunate wave of parents and siblings that loses a loved one to suicide. And I know my dad's been really good. We talked about Laura Love and her family.
Yes.
And the Sam Aiden Kindness Fund. And I know all three of us are really connected to Laura.
Yeah.
And when that happened to Sam, it was something that was very important to all of us to reach out and to be a resource there for Laura. And now she's doing the same thing for other families.
Yeah. What are some ways that you all like to honor and remember Jack, and what are some ways that we as a community can honor and remember him?
So I would add, I changed careers after Jack passed. I have been an affordable housing person, policy, finance for 25 years. But many, many years ago, I used to investigate child abuse and neglect. And I worked for a large group called the Menninger Foundation that had a national program called the Charlie Network. Children have all rights, legal and educational. And once I lost Jack, the mayor asked me if I would come back. And during the 6 month I was out, John led a group of about a dozen kids that were friends of Jack's that after he died came to our house and said, what can we do? They came up with 11 things they wanted to accomplish, ranging from a school walkout, because the kids were just not happy with how the school responded to Jack's death. A cheerleader 3 weeks later took her life. In our district, we lost 5 kids in a 6 month period. And it just devastated the community. So fast forward, John and the kids called themselves Jack Strong. A lot of things from a clothing line, which are T-shirts. That's the clothing line.
Yeah.
The legislation they worked on, focus groups. And then I went back and started a suicide prevention program for the city and county of Denver, a youth suicide prevention program. And when we talk about stigma and access to care, my focus, and I think John's as well, has really been in elevating the conversation around, stigma. We've stigmatized the conversation. It's now time to elevate it because our kids are talking about it, and we as adults need to have that conversation with our kids. Yeah. So that's opened up an array of, in my opinion, an array of resources. We're still never going to have enough clinicians. Yeah. We're not going to have enough resources, but I think we collectively stay focused on this. We're going to make an impact.
Absolutely. You already are. Rick, if you could tell parents one thing, what would it be?
I've been asked that question a lot. I have to phrase it this way. Sometimes when we have kids, if you have adolescents, what we think is typical adolescent behavior, what I've learned now in terms of risk and protective factors, may not necessarily be typical adolescent behavior. Change of appetite, changing friend groups, sneaking out at night, just starting to engage in alcohol or drugs. You start to look at that, then that's compounded with if there's some other organic mental health issues that are going on. It can be a lethal combination. What I would say to parents is have the conversation with them. Be open with them. Don't be judgmental. You want to find out what's going on and be a resource. That may not necessarily forestall what may or may not happen, but you got to have that conversation to begin with that. So I would just say to parents, have the conversation. Be open about it, about your own vulnerabilities as well.
Yeah, I've struggled with my mental health in the past, and for a long time I was afraid to share that with my son Jackson because I didn't want him to see me as less than or weak or feel anxiety because he thought I might not be, strong enough. But as he got older and was experiencing some terrible things among his peer group, I felt compelled to share some things with him, and I think it is much better to be vulnerable with your children within reason and in age-appropriate ways than to make them think you're just a rock. And there is also a misconception that I also fell into of thinking if I talk about suicide with my child, I will introduce the concept to them. And that's also not necessarily true. If I could go back in time, I would have the conversations with him earlier and say something to the effect of, Jackson, it's just like when we fall off a bike and scrape our knee and it hurts so bad, we need a Band-Aid, maybe some x-rays. Sometimes our hearts and our minds can feel unsettled or uneasy or feel pain. And that's normal. That is a normal function of being a human. And that is the same thing as falling and breaking something. You need to maybe see a doctor, get some rest, maybe have some medicine, maybe have some therapy. It's okay to feel that way. It's not abnormal. A lot of people feel that way. And there's hope. The message of hope, of this is a function of humanity. I think that needs to be conveyed to more and more people at a younger age. Would you agree with that? Push back on that?
You could not have said that any better, to be honest with you. What you just described was combating stigma.
Wonderful. Yeah. I mean, just the fact that we're able to talk about this too. I'm sure there's people who are afraid to bring up Jack's name. They don't want to hurt you. They don't want to bring up painful memories. Like even I'm like, it's a sensitive subject. It's a painful thing. But what would you say to people who are afraid to talk about it with you?
I would say something as catastrophic as happened to our family, it'll do one or two things in my opinion, to a person or a family. It will destroy that person or that family, or you're going to find purpose.
Yeah.
And you can find purpose in life. Grief will help you find that purpose. And purpose then can lead you into accomplishing something to, in our case, to destigmatize the conversation.
Yeah.
So I think that for me, that's really critical.
Awesome.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah. So if everybody's listening, they shouldn't be afraid to talk to you about this because you have a mission, you have a purpose, you have a lot to accomplish.
Exactly. Yeah. Talking about it is what we want. That's why we put our story out there.
Right.
And that's part of what keeps Jack's memory alive too. Like selfishly, is we love reliving those moments and memories and everything. Obviously, the day that we lost Jack was really difficult, but there was a lot of other time that was really wonderful with Jack, and we love reliving those moments.
That's so wonderful to hear. Thank you for being here and being vulnerable and sharing that. Can you share any legal efforts that you've been involved with and what has been the most challenging and or rewarding part of that?
Sure. We worked with the Colorado legislature and a couple of 2 or 3 sponsors on a bill. Colorado, I want to say 2017 passed a law called, it was a statewide anti-bullying legislation.
Okay.
First time, and it had to be reviewed every 3 years. Jack died in the third year when it was coming up for review. And we got involved with that, and we looked at the legislation and said, something needs to change here.
Yeah.
Because it didn't have impacted families, didn't have educators, didn't have clinicians that are given input in drafting the legislation. So fast forward, we were able to push through. It's called Jack and Kate's Law. I think it's House Bill 2021?
1221.
1221. And it was just reviewed again. I think the biggest challenge has been, because the work I've been doing at the city before I retired was going into schools, bringing the creative folks in, bringing in nonprofits like Judy's House to talk with kids about trauma, grief, and resiliency. The challenge is, when I've gone into schools, I've asked the teachers, so are you familiar with this anti-bullying legislation that should be embedded in your school policy? We've never heard of it. We've never trained on it. So I am now working with the Attorney General's office and the governor's office to say, what are we going to do about this now?
Yeah.
Because it's just sitting there. It's just like a blue ribbon report that sits on the shelf. It doesn't do you any good.
Wow.
So there's some legislative stuff that we're working on. Also, in the state of Colorado, every school district in the state of Colorado collects data on attempts, hospitalizations, and deaths. What I've talked to the state attorney general's office and some lawmakers about, and what I hope to pursue next session, is we need to look at every school district, look at programming that they offer around mental health. We need to look at demographic data that they collect, as well as the attempts, hospitalizations, and deaths. By doing that with a tight budget like we have in Colorado and many states, is we can then allocate it. School District A has very similar demographic to School District B, but B doesn't have the programming that A does, and B has high incidence of attempts, hospitalizations, or death. You can allocate your resources more efficiently.
Wow.
So that's one of the other pieces that we want to work on in January with the legislature.
Wow. Let's go back to that anti-bullying legislation. You say it's passed and it's just sitting on a shelf?
Essentially it is, but here's how it works. The legislation gets passed down. It goes to the districts. General counsel and the school districts are supposed to summarize it, push it out with continuing education.
Okay.
But they're not doing that.
Okay. And it's not mandated that they do it? It's just
It's not a shall. And that's where we fought very hard, and I'll continue to fight that. They shall incorporate this, and they shall do this, not they may if they choose to. It has to be mandatory from my perspective. And what I realized, with the pushback we got in rural communities, is we don't have the resources. The superintendent's driving the bus. The superintendent's teaching the class.
wow.
So that, and I understand that argument.
Right.
But we can address that argument.
Absolutely. Wow. Of course, my problem-solving brain is turning right now, like webinars, telehealth, educational materials that are actually fun and cool that kids will want to consume. And anyway, well, let's talk offline about that, because there are avenues.
Agreed.
If there were one or two things you'd want our audience to walk away with today, what would those be?
I think one of those that is super important, and I try and push out in every piece of messaging that I do, and this is advice for parents, for friends, for siblings, is if you are genuinely concerned about someone, you need to ask them directly if they have a suicide plan. And if that answer is anything other than no, a hard no, it's time to elevate care.
100%.
I would just add one thing. These are really difficult times in this country, and I would just say be kind to each other. We're all we've got. That simple thing. And I was walking out of the hospital the other day and on crutches, and this really moved me, and I told John this. Janine was with me, and I was walking out, and there's this young guy about John's age, and he leans over, and as he's walking by, he says, "It's going to get better." He says, "I was in a walking boot for 8 weeks or something like that." And it was just really motivating to know that, this guy didn't know us from anybody. Just saw me kind of struggling on my crutches. And so that moved me. So I would just say, be kind to each other. We're really all we've got.
I'm so glad you said that, and that reminded me of something, which was when I was struggling, and I told this to a dad who had lost a child to suicide, because he was struggling with I just don't understand how she could have done this to us. And I was like, she didn't want to leave you. She was most likely in pain in so much pain. And she was afraid it wasn't going to go away. And she didn't know how it was going to get better. She was probably scared. And so just to any parent who has lost somebody, or anybody, there's probably a whole nother slew of episodes we could do about this, but it's a lot of people just don't understand how somebody could do that. And until you've been in that place of fear of I don't know what to do with this, it's too much, it's overwhelming, you just don't know. And to your point, just be kind. And to the guy who told you it's going to get better, let people know that it really is going to get better. That's not like a throwaway statement. It's not like the same thing as like, oh, hope you're having a good day. It really will get better. Mm-hmm. There's therapy, there's medicine, there's hope. There's so many people that have felt that way and are now okay, myself included. Mm-hmm. There's hope. You don't need to be afraid to share when you're going through that. You can have a successful life and career and, have ups and downs. So, on a lighter note, John, you have brought your talent and skills to work at Bark, and we're so grateful that you're here. Tell us about how you got here and what your day-to-day looks like.
Well, thank you. And I'm incredibly grateful to be at Bark. So it's actually kind of interesting how I ended up at Bark, and I think it's a cool story that a lot of the folks that I work with on a day-to-day may or may not know. But my first introduction to Bark was when we were filming Childhood 2.0. And I think you and I had connected, and Brian and I had connected, and over about 1.5 to 2 years, I would occasionally text Brian or call Brian, and he offered some really great advice for helping me get Mountain in My Mind off the ground. And It kind of served a little bit of as a mentor for me.
Yeah, shout out to Brian Basin. Great guy. Not just sucking up to our boss, no. Truly a wonderful human.
Yeah, he didn't have to do that, right?
No.
Like he's the CEO of a large company, and he is busy all the time.
Right.
And he's answering these calls from like an early 20-year-old who's just trying to like kind of figure it out in the world. I think that's speaks a lot to Brian's character, and to the character of Bark. So I had been kind of emailing back and forth with Brian, calling back and forth with him, and after undergrad, and then I went to grad school and got a master's in innovation. I was on the job hunt, and I had decided that I just couldn't. I watched so many of my peers go work for companies that, make great revenue, but don't necessarily have a strong purpose and passion behind them like Bark does. And I told Brian, I said, is there any way? And he said, absolutely, and connected me up with Leslie and some other team members and Justin. And nice. They welcomed me with open arms to the team. And so my day-to-day is, I guess my title is Growth Marketing Manager. And my day-to-day is managing a lot of our influencer content and paid social advertisements. So it's a lot of mostly meetings for me, which I actually enjoy.
A lot of meetings.
Yeah. I actually enjoy meetings. It's like you just get to meet people and tell them, share with them my passion for Bark's products and for Bark's mission, and meet other parents that share that passion. Yeah, it's kind of cool and get to kind of tap into the creative brain too on the ad sets. Work closely with some of our other team members on just kind of writing out creative that we know is going to perform well as advertisements on socials and other mediums.
Nice. Well, we're so glad you're here, and I echo that sentiment of it's a blessing to be able to do what we do. It doesn't feel like a job. It just, every day we wake up and we get to work on work that matters with really great humans. So thank you, Brian. Again, thank you for my job.
Same.
Yeah, thank you so much. Is there anything else that you think we should cover before we wrap today?
At least in Colorado, and I think it's happening nationally, just the pullback on resources for mental health, particularly in schools and people post-COVID. I've talked to so many teachers who said the behavioral issues with kids in school right now is just horrendous, because you're a sixth grader when COVID hit, and 2 years later, now you're a ninth grader in high school. All that lost socialization, learning those skills, the acting out, the behavioral acting out in schools. Truancy rates are high.
Yeah.
When you look at test scores, they're down. And then we're pulling back resources in education. To me, that's just unacceptable.
Yeah, I think that's very irresponsible. Yes, regardless of where you fall on the political spectrum, our children need support. They need more recess, more art, more music, more mental health care, not to sit for 8 hours a day and not to be given screens that are unfiltered and unmonitored and contribute to a lot of these issues that we are talking about. So, yeah. If anybody is listening or watching and they'd like to connect with the two of you and support your efforts, where should they go?
I'm going to give them yours and I'll give them mine.
Sure. Just mountaininmymind.com is probably a good place to find us. We're on Instagram under the same handle, YouTube under the same handle too.
Great.
Okay, you're going to think I'm crazy, but even when I was working, I had my cell phone number on my business card.
Oh my God.
But I'm not going to give them my cell phone number.
Okay, I was like, be
I'm
careful.
not doing that.
Okay.
But I will give them an email.
Okay.
Okay, it's richardl.padilla, Padilla @gmail.com. And if it's spam, you'll go spammed away.
Yeah.
But looking for an effort, I think we can all do collectively something to help our kids. And I'm a
Awesome.
part of it.
Awesome. All right. John, Rick Padilla, thank you so much for being here. And we look forward to helping many, many more families together.
Thank you
Looking
so much.
forward to it.
Yes, thank you.